Total meltdown. Air Canada workers defy orders and humiliate Carney. Canada is experiencing a political crisis as Prime Minister Mark Carney faces unprecedented pushback from Air Canada flight attendants who are openly defying federal back-to-work orders. What began as a labor dispute over wages and working conditions has quickly escalated into a broader national issue, exposing vulnerabilities in Carney's leadership and raising questions about the Liberal government's priorities. The strike, now involving over 10,500 flight attendants across the country, has left airline operations severely disrupted, with connecting flights grounded, airports crowded, and passengers stranded. The refusal to comply with government orders signals a dramatic breakdown in labor relations and is shaking public confidence in the new administration. Carney's intervention, declaring the strike illegal and attempting to impose binding arbitration, has backfired. Union President Mark Hancock has openly rejected the order, emphasizing that flight attendants will not return to work under conditions perceived as unfair. This defiance has resonated with other labor groups, drawing support from machinists, postal workers, and teacher unions, who have joined demonstrations and rallied outside airports. The solidarity across multiple sectors signals that Carney's heavy-handed approach could spark a wave of labor unrest beyond the airline industry. The situation is exacerbated by Carney's policy record and recent government decisions. EV adoption in Canada remains far below Liberal targets, with just 7.9% of vehicles registered from January to June being electric, highlighting the impracticality of mandates in a country with harsh winters and limited charging infrastructure outside urban centers. Questions have emerged about the influence of foreign supply chains, particularly China, and whether financial interests in companies connected to the EV sector or Air Canada may have shaped government policy. Critics suggest these overlapping economic interests cast doubt on the administration's impartiality and its ability to prioritize Canadians' needs over corporate gains. Domestically, frustration is mounting as Canadians compare compensation for refugees to that of frontline workers. Some LGBTQ refugees receive 12 months of financial support upon arrival, while Air Canada flight attendants, many with decades of experience, struggle with low wages and unpaid work hours. The public perceives a disconnect between government priorities and the lived realities of everyday Canadians, intensifying the political pressure on Carney. Internationally, Carney's influence appears limited. Despite Canada's significant aid contributions to Ukraine, the country was excluded from recent diplomatic talks alongside leaders such as Vladimir Putin, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Emmanuel Macron. This absence has further diminished Carney's credibility on the global stage, reinforcing a narrative that Canada's leadership is being sidelined in critical geopolitical discussions. Labor law experts note that the government's position is precarious. Constitutional protections for collective bargaining and union membership mean any attempts to enforce compliance aggressively could be challenged in court. Mary Tremblay, overseeing the Canada Industrial Relations Board and formerly an Air Canada lawyer, presents a potential conflict of interest that unions argue undermines the legitimacy of government actions. Legal proceedings could prolong the dispute and magnify the political fallout, making Carney appear both authoritarian and disconnected from workers' realities. Financial entanglements complicate the crisis further. Brookfield owns a substantial stake in Air Canada Jazz, which operates in conjunction with Air Canada flights. The rapid push to end the strike appears aligned with these corporate interests, fueling public suspicion that Carney's decisions may be influenced by personal or institutional investments rather than fair labor practices. As flight attendants continue to resist returning to work, public opinion increasingly frames the dispute as emblematic of broader systemic issues, with Carney caught in the middle. Attempts by Air Canada management to blame employees for operational disruptions have only intensified public anger. Stories of flight attendants working unpaid hours for boarding, deplaning, and other duties while being criticized by their employer have resonated with Canadians, further energizing the labor movement. Analysts suggest that Carney's approval ratings could suffer significantly if the government appears to side with corporate interests over workers' rights. Despite the government ordering arbitration and promising negotiation, the union remains steadfast. The strike has revealed deeper cracks in Canada's labor relations framework, demonstrating that enforcement through executive power alone is insufficient when employees feel marginalized and unfairly treated. Public demonstrations, airport lane blockages, and coordinated support from other unions amplify the message that workers are prepared to stand firm for fair treatment. The political implications are immediate. Carney's popularity, already under scrutiny following the snap federal election on April 28, 2025, faces additional pressure as Canadians assess his capacity to manage crises without alienating key constituencies. Heavy-handed interventions, perceived favoritism, and a disconnect from workers' realities create a potent mix that could influence the next wave of elections and shape the public's perception of the Liberal Party's governance. As negotiations continue, the eyes of the nation remain fixed on both the government and the unions. The resolution of this strike is likely to set a precedent for future labor disputes, influencing policy approaches, employer-employee relations, and political accountability. How Carney navigates this challenge will not only determine the fate of Air Canada's workforce, but could define his tenure as Canada's new Prime Minister. This Air Canada crisis exemplifies a broader trend of Canadian frustration with government priorities. Citizens are questioning leadership, demanding fair treatment, and pushing back against mandates that appear impractical or influenced by corporate and foreign interests. The stakes are high. Carney's response will either restore confidence or deepen perceptions of incompetence, potentially reshaping Canada's political landscape for years to come. The combination of economic pressure, labor unrest, and international marginalization has placed Carney in an extremely vulnerable position. The Air Canada strike is no longer just a labor dispute. It is a test of leadership, ethics, and the government's ability to balance competing interests while respecting the rights of workers. With the public closely watching, every move carries the potential for either reconciliation or political damage that may linger well beyond the resolution of the strike.